Hey guys, Matt Bell here with video number 2 in a two-part series on frets. If you are sort of new to the fret world, you might want to check out video number 1 as we sort of do frets 101 and 201, sort of freshman and sophomore year in college frets. In this video, we're going to do like 301. We're skipping our senior year because, you know, whatever. And then we're going to grad level frets. So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about what frets are and what they can do for you, okay? So in frets 301, we're going to be talking about the different kinds of frets. So there are several manufacturers who make frets. Wood Violins, NS Design, Jordan, Cantini, Zeta. They all make fretted violins. And so each of those are a little bit different. And we're going to talk about what some of those different kind of frets are. The next one is more the grad level. Like, how do I actually play in tune with frets? Because they're not magic. It turns out that you can play out of tune with frets. And what even is in tune? What depends on what the definition of is. So we're going to get into that. First, 301. We can't go to grad level unless we finish our junior year in school. So what are the different kinds? There are standard frets, which is what you're going to see. Standard frets, like all the violinists are like, what's yes, standard frets, sorry. So it's what you're going to see on NS Design. It's what you're going to see on Cantini, Zeta, Jordan. Each of them are a little different, but essentially they take a wire and they press it into the fingerboard. And let me grab one of these. Here's an NS Design instrument here, and you can see that the frets are just set into there. And then so these are going to be like 1.2 or 1.3 millimeter frets. That's also what Wood Violins uses. It's what Cantini Violins uses. It's what Stratton Skull uses. And then there are some bigger frets. We're going to see Jordan. They actually use like 2 millimeter frets. They're not really any taller. They're kind of wider. Okay, so we can see that. But what do frets look like from the side? Well, this is what they look like from the side. So you got your fingerboard and you've got the fret sticking up, and it's sort of it's a rounded thing, and you can feel it underneath your fingers, and that's how they work. So when you play behind that fret, again, like we talked about in the first video, if you haven't seen that, you should watch it. I'm really good in that video. If you play behind the fret, you're going to be flat because these frets are not so high that when you push your finger down, it mashes against the fret. The vibrating length of the string still stops at your finger. Wood Violins does a different thing. Here's my Viper. You can see, I don't know if you can see in the video from the side, but these frets are shaved down a little bit. So they take a regular fret and they actually shave it down. So go back and look and see. So here's your rounded fret. And then Wood Violins sort of shaves those down a little bit. And they shave them down more on the treble side of the instrument than on the bass side of the instrument because the strings are smaller, right? So that makes sense. So Wood Violins frets, they fret out even less than standard frets do. And it's really more, you can just feel them underneath your fingers, and it's a tactile confirmation that you're in the right place on the fingerboard. And then Wood Violins also does a thing called phantom frets. And we got the little white bars down here, gray bars down there. They actually put the fret in the instrument, and when instead of shaving them down, they shave them like way down. They essentially shave them off. So it is a visual indicator on the fingerboard that you can kind of see. Now, don't get too excited about how much they're going to help you, because as you're looking down the instrument, that's a pretty strange angle that you're looking down the instrument. It's not always super easy to see where those frets are on your fingerboard, especially if you're on a stage like I'm used to being on, flashing lights and lights changing colors and all that. You know, you got movers flying around and you're blind half the time up there anyway. The phantom frets are not going to be super helpful on a crazy rock stage because you're not going to be able to see them. But if you're in a situation where you're not always playing with lights blinding you left and right, then maybe it can be a nice visual indicator for where you are. Maybe you're looking down the neck and you're like, okay, I'm going to shift, and it gives you a visual point to shift to. Okay, so they're going to be more helpful than not frets, not as helpful as frets. And let's face it, frets do feel a little bit different underneath your fingers. They do take a little bit of getting used to under your fingers. So when I say that, generally I tell people just kind of ignore the frets and your body's going to figure out what to do with them. Play on top of the fret. Yes, it does change the feel a little bit, and I really do like the feel of a fretless neck. So if you sort of want the benefit of that fretless feel, but maybe a little bit of a visual assist on there, then phantom frets can be helpful. So grad level frets, how do I actually play in tune with these? And when we say actually play in tune, now we're sort of progressing past a beginner where a C sharp is always a C sharp. And that, when your teacher puts tapes on the instrument, when you first learn how to play, you ever notice how wide those tapes are? That's not a point on the fingerboard, it's a region on the fingerboard. And there's a reason for that. And it's because there's a difference between equal temperament and just temperament. And if you're not an advanced enough player to really be thinking about equal versus just temperament, then you can just stop the video at this point and just say, you know what, the fret is going to be close enough, okay? The thing is, with equal versus just temperament, an octave is doubling in frequency. When we say A is 440, your open A on your violin is 440 hertz. The next A up, so third finger on the E string, is 880 hertz. So that's the doubling in frequency from 440 to 880 is 1 octave. There's 12 notes in that octave. So how are they distributed? Are they equally distributed in that octave? And if you're a piano player, you're going, yeah, of course they are. Well, for piano players, they are. There's equal temperament, which means that the 12 notes are equally spaced in that octave. So that you're going to have the same amount of space between each note, the same amount of intonation space between each note. However, just temperament doesn't really work like that. Just temperament, not all half steps are the same. It is dependent on what key you're in. And you're thinking, well, how come piano players, how come it's different? Well, a piano is tuned in equal temperament, so that piano is equally out of tune in every key. That's literally what they're going for. So the piano is equally out of tune in every key. It turns out when you play in the key of C sharp, where a D note is different than if you're playing in the key of G. Now we're kind of stuck, violinists are kind of stuck with open strings, but we don't have to use open strings. We can finger all of those notes except for open G if you're one of those 4-string guys. So whatever your lowest note is, you're stuck with where that is. But every other note, you can actually adjust. And what you're going to discover is that there are some ratios that we come up with. So if I'm playing 2 notes, if those notes are in unison, then the ratio between those 2 frequencies is 1 to 1, right? So if I'm playing an open A and I'm fingering that note on the D string with my 4th finger or whatever finger I'm using, then that's 440 hertz and my open A is 440 hertz. That is a 1 to 1 ratio. And you can kind of figure out if you get the octave, then you've got 880 hertz versus 440 hertz. That's a 2 to 1 ratio. And you can see here on the left-hand column, the fundamental, the just scale. Let's look at the 5th. So it's a 3 to 2 ratio. So that's a nice 1.500. And that's why when you play your open 5ths and you're tuning your instruments, you can feel it. You can feel that instrument coming into tune, right? Because those frequencies are lining up to where we've got 3 wavelengths laying on top of 2 wavelengths, and you've got a node there. So that's why you can hear as you're coming out of tune, and let's just do this. Let's plug the instrument in, and let's do this. So if I got my A and E playing together, let's pull that out. Did you hear that the beats in there kind of went away as we were getting closer to, like you can feel it coming into tune, right? If you play 5ths on a piano, because they're in just temperament, it's 1.498. Now that sounds like it's pretty close, and it is pretty close, but you don't get that satisfaction of having the fifth exactly right. And here's the issue with using a tuner on your instrument. And this is why in orchestras, they give you an A 440, and then they have you tune the instrument off of the other string. Well, if we read that correctly, that means that my D string is actually, if I'm looking at equal temperament, my D string is actually, that fifth 1.50 is a little bit larger than the 1.498. Yes, it is. That means my D string, if I check it against a tuner, is actually going to be a little bit flat. And then if I tune my G string a fifth off of my D, it's actually going to be a little more flat. And if you're an extended range player like I am, a six string player, that C is going to be even more flat, and the F is going to be even more flat. So by the time I've got that stack up of tolerances there, by the time I get down to my F string, if I've tuned it with my ear, when I check it against a tuner, it's significantly flat. So you've got to kind of decide when you're tuning, especially an extended range instrument, it's generally best to tune your string, your open strings, with a tuner. But then you've got to understand you're using your ear for everything else. Now, how does this affect the way that we're playing with frets? Because it does affect the way we're playing with frets. It means that all of your frets are laid out on the fingerboard in equal temperament, because they just measure it, right? That's the only way to do it. You've got your 0th fret is the nut, and then you've got the 12th fret at the octave, and then you just measure them, and they lay them out. So each of those frets, and of course they're getting closer and closer as you're coming up, because that's how the physics of the instrument work. But your frets are placed on the fretboard in equal temperament. And if you want to play in just temperament, and you're going to hear those little beats if you're playing a third, and that third is just a little bit off, that major third, gosh, depending on what key I'm in, I actually need to stretch that third a little bit. I need to play it a little bit sharp, to make it in tune. That means you're going to be playing a little high on the fret, okay? So, frets are not magic. We've had some customers that were fairly new to this whole thing, and they're sitting here with a tuner, and they're like, I can't get the thing to play in tune because I'm sitting here with a tuner, and I got A's at 440, and that A's at 880, but when I come here, that note isn't just right? That's a perfect example right here. So I'm going to play right on top of the fret. That's kind of hitting a little bit, like it's not quite right. I'm gonna play that a little bit flat. Hear how that comes in? I've stretched that interval a little bit by playing a little bit flatter, because my E string, open E string, is fixed. You know where it is. I can't bend that string. So if I want that minor third from C sharp to E to be in tune, I should have to stretch it a little bit, which means I have to play just a hair flat on that fret. Frets are not magic. You can't just use the fret and say, well, I'm playing on top of the fret, I'm in tune, okay? That is not how they work. Frets are landmarks. So does that fret, when you're playing in a loud environment, like we talked before, I got a drummer splashing around behind me, I cannot hear. I don't know what I'm playing. I can't hear me. Maybe the battery in my in-ears went dead right in the middle of a song. And you know what? You don't stop. You just keep playing. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm just going to trust that my frets have got me close enough. Okay, we're in a loud rock environment. The difference between just temperament, equal temperament in a rock environment, everybody's drinking, right? So is it super, super important that I've got the difference between 1.500 wavelength ratio to 1.498? In a live environment, when everybody's having a good time, there's beer bottles clinking, is the difference that important? Probably not. If we're in a classical setting, well, I probably don't need frets in a classical setting because I can hear the instrument. So where do we land in between as you're sort of checking your frets? They are landmarks, and they will get you close, but they are not perfect, and they are not magic. You cannot expect your frets to be magic because they are not magic. They're laid out in equal temperament, not just temperament, which is what your ears hear, okay? So let's talk practical application. You need to practice. You need to practice, and that's what's going to make you a better player. You've got to use your ears, because your ears are the ones that can hear when those wavelengths are lining up, and that's what in tune is, not what your tuner says. Your ears are better than your tuner, okay? And then here's a weird thing. You're like, distortion. I thought distortion hid all the little mistakes that I'm making. Distortion may hide some of the little, how do you say, attacking the notes, or they might hide some of your phrasing issues, but distortion absolutely exposes your intonation mistakes. And let's look at that. Let's come here and crank a little distortion on this. Maybe not a lot of distortion, but a little. That's a little hot. Let's turn that down. So distortion is going to really expose any of your intonation issues. So I actually suggest maybe practicing, if you're going to practice double stops, practice with a little bit of distortion. It is going to totally expose any of your intonation issues. All right? So that's going to help you develop a relationship with your instrument. And that's the thing. Why would we want to use frets if they're not perfect? Well, they are landmarks. They are closer than a fretless instrument, especially in a loud situation where you can't hear yourself to make good adjustments. And maybe it's going to help change your mindset. It's going to help you think about your instrument rather in terms of positions, first, second, third position. You're going to start thinking in half positions where those frets are. So, we think about maybe our first finger on the A string is a B note, and then second finger is C. But we don't often think about, what if I put my first finger where C sharp is? That's kind of like second and a half position. And if I come up, put my first finger where D is, that's third position. What if my first finger is where D sharp is? You're sort of thinking third position with my first finger squeezed up, but it's not really third position, is it? It's really 3.5 position. So it can sort of help you change your mindset on how you're attacking your instrument and your fingerboard. And maybe having frets is going to make you really think a lot harder about just versus equal temperament. So that's sort of grad level frets, and I hope that's been helpful for you. And look forward to seeing you guys the next time we do another video.